Please sit down. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to use the lapel mic, and then if that fails for some reason, I will resort to this mic. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with you today. I'd like to begin the discussion about the budget by describing a fellow that we're going to call Steve Dowling. Steve Dowling works for a bank, and he went to visit with his boss to have his annual performance review, and he got in the office and the boss said, "Steve, I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is you're doing a great job and you have a bright future with this bank, and we're very happy with what you're doing. The bad news is the bank is having some difficult times. We've had some loan losses, we're not making money, and we need to cut. And Steve, I'm sorry to tell you, we're going to have to cut your salary." So Steve was surprised and dismayed, but he went home and he talked to his wife about it. And she said, "Well, honey, that's not very good news, because you're telling me our income's down, and we just put one of our kids in preschool, so we've got that additional expense. And we just put braces on one of the kids, so we've got that additional expense. So our expenses are up, and now you're telling me our income's down. What are we going to do?" And Steve said, "Well, we got some money that I inherited from my uncle, and we can use that to fill the gap between expenses and income. And next year will be better." A year went by, and Steve went in to see his boss again, annual review. He was hoping he'd get his pay restored, maybe even get a raise. And his boss said, "Steve, I got kind of the same news again. Bank is still doing poorly. In fact, we're worse than we ever were. And I'm going to have to cut your salary again. I'm going to have to cut it more than I cut it the first time." Steve went home and explained that to his wife, and his wife said, "Well, that's just great news, because we have 2 kids in braces now. We have 2 kids in preschool now, and so our expenses have gone up again this year, and you're telling me our income went down still further? What are we going to do?" And Steve said, "Well, we've still got some money left from my uncle. We'll use that to fill the gap." South Dakota, it's no coincidence that Steve Downing's initials, SD, are the same as the initials of our state. South Dakota has experienced kind of the same thing that Steve has experienced. We've had a couple of years of declining revenue, not slow down in growth, declining revenue, and we've had at the same time increasing medical and education expenditures. And we've been doing the same thing that Steve has been doing. We've been relying on our uncle, Sam, to fill the gap with stimulus money. We have a structural deficit. Let's talk about what a structural deficit is. A structural deficit is when ongoing expenses exceed ongoing revenues. We have that situation. Steve had that situation. We exclude stimulus funds, we exclude one-time revenues, we exclude one-time expenses. To determine how we're doing, we look at ongoing revenue versus ongoing expenses. As I crafted my budget, my goal was to eliminate the structural deficit this year. And we're going to have to be making some tough choices for that to occur. Let me start by showing you where we are and how we got there. Let's start by looking at revenues. This chart shows the history of our ongoing revenues. It ignores one-time revenues. This is ongoing revenues, our sales tax, our contractor's excise, video lottery, all our ongoing revenue sources. In the adopted column, you can see the dollar amount that the legislature and governor agreed when they adopted the budget. They were projecting those revenues for the following fiscal year. The actual receipts, you can see, are the money that actually came in, and the difference is shown on the right. In fiscal year 2002, for example, you can see we projected we'd raise $851 million. We actually brought in $837, a negative of $13 million. So we overestimated what we would bring in. Then we did a pretty good job for 4 years. In 2003 and 2004, we were pretty conservative. We got in quite a bit more than we thought we would. In 5 and 6, we did a pretty good job. Then in 7 and 8, we missed the mark a little bit, not by a lot, but we missed it by a little bit. And then in 09 and 10, we missed the mark by quite a bit. And you can see at the bottom, the year we're in right now, fiscal year 11, we're projecting right now that we're going to miss the mark by about 15.8 million. We adjourned last year thinking we'd get in 1,154,000, but it looks more like we're going to get in 1,138,000 now. So the takeaway point is that over the last 11 years, we haven't done a very good job most of the time in predicting our revenue. The other thing I want you to take away from this is to look down the actual receipts column. You can see from 02 to 03, our revenue went up. And up again in 04 and 05 and 06, up again in 07 and 08. Then in fiscal year 09, our revenue went down, just like Steve. In 10, it went down still more. And in 11, we're looking that we're expecting to get about 1,138,000. We're still not up to where we were in 08. So our revenue has really been soft for 3 years in a row now, and we're still below where we were in fiscal year 08. Let's look at FY11, the year we're in right now, a little more closely. When the legislature adjourned last year, we adopted this revenue estimate. We thought we'd bring in 1,154,700, and as you can see, we're receiving a lot more sales and use tax, but 4 out of the top 5 general fund revenue sources have been revised lower as a sluggish economy, along with several other factors, has caused some key revenue sources to decline. So you can see there is that 15.8 drop in revenue for fiscal year 11. Although income will be lower, I'll show that expenses are also predicted to be a little lower for FY11. And with revisions to the FY11 budget, I believe we can balance without using any reserves. Now let's look at fiscal year 12 projections. This column shows what we believe now will be the income we receive in FY11, and then to the right of it, what we think we'll get in FY12 as of now. And you can see that we're expecting that our sales and use tax will go up quite a bit, and other sources will go up. We're expecting about 25.3 more millions in gross revenue, but you also see a one-time receipt in FY12 that's a negative number. There is a positive one-time receipt that is combined with a negative. A positive one-time receipt of $2.1 million is being offset by a large one-time tax refund of $27.5 million that the state is liable to pay. We owe a refund of bank franchise taxes that were overpaid. Sort of like when you file your income tax return and you realize you've been withheld too much, or if you're a business person, you've submitted too much in your quarterly estimates, and now you're asking for a refund. Our bank franchise tax payments, quarterly estimates, grossly overpaid the bank franchise taxes owed. As a consequence of the federal legislation, bank income went way down. And so we owe $27.5 million in a refund. And that's shown here as offset in a slight degree by a 2.1% one-time positive. We've looked at revenue. Now let's look at some expense information. This shows in a pie chart the 4 areas in which we spend our general funds. Education, as you can see, receives about half of our general fund dollars. 36% goes to taking care of people, and Medicaid is the big part of that fraction. Then protecting the public, the corrections, courts, public safety, that represents 11% of our spending, and all the rest of government, the 8 departments, 4 bureaus, the legislature, the governor's office, the 5 constitutional offices, collectively only represent about 4% or 55 million of our expenditures. Many people would advocate that the bureaucracy of government must be cut to solve our budget problems. If we eliminated this entirely, it wouldn't do the job. Let's look at a history of spending in these 4 categories. These bar charts show that over the years, fiscal year 04 to 11, our expenses have grown year after year. Now, in the last 3 years, you can see that the rate of increase has slowed, but nevertheless, there has been continued increase in our total expenditures. Let's look at each of these 4, and you can see I've taken care of people. That's the blue bar. You can see how that's grown over those years. Education is the gray part of the bar. Protecting the public is the red, and all the rest is represented by the green. Let's look at those separately in a line chart. This represents the breakout per the legislative adopted budgets for fiscal year 03 through 11. If we assume that FY03 is 0, and we've spent more money in these categories, how much have we spent in addition to what we were spending in FY03? In the case of taking care of people, we're spending $188 million more this year than we spent in fiscal year 03. Now, why? We have almost 21,000 more people on Medicaid or in the Children's Health Insurance Program. And incidentally, that larger number is utilizing Medicaid more per person than the smaller number use it per person. So more people using it more. Education, we're spending $125 million more than we spent in fiscal year 03. Part of that is because we have almost 2,400 more students in our higher education system. In our K-12 system, we actually have 3,500 fewer students. But most of this increase is increases spent in K-12. Protecting the public, we're spending about $43 million more. That's leveled off, that growth in the last few years. And I forgot to mention, the reason why the drop occurred from FY10 to 11 is because of the cuts that the legislature and governor made to higher ed last year, mostly that. The rest of state government, $9 million more is spent than in 03. You can see it went up, it's come back down, relatively flat. Almost half of that additional money is research, money spent on our research centers. It's not bureaucracy, it's not people in little cubicles in Pier or other offices. It's in money spent on research. So that's kind of where our spending has gone. Let's look at ongoing revenue and ongoing expenses together. The blue line shows ongoing expenses from FY03 through the current year as it was proposed last December. Then in the black line represents our ongoing revenues, again, estimating as of last December. And you can see that we've got a gap under the December proposal for FY11. We've got a gap of about $108 million. Let's look further into the future. This adds the December proposed budget for FY 2012, again, this proposal that was offered to you last December, and you can see the structural deficit, which is the gap between ongoing revenues and ongoing expenses, is reduced in FY11 a little bit, and the FY12 is reduced, but it still leaves a structural deficit of $74.8 million. It does not solve the problem of our structural deficit. it shows that even the 5% cuts that were proposed last December and the 5.9% cuts that were proposed to the executive agencies, although it reduces our expenses down, as you can see here, and we acknowledge that revenue will come up, it still does not solve the problem. In the future, these two lines have to be matching. They have to be together like they were back here. And as you can see in my proposed budget, they do match. This chart shows my proposal for revisions to the 2011 budget, as well as my recommended 2012 budget. And again, it's ongoing revenue versus ongoing expenses. The FY11 gap has improved slightly to 103 because, again, we've updated the revenue estimates and we've updated the expense estimates. So the gap is narrowed in 11, and the FY12 budget proposal will close the gap between ongoing revenue and ongoing expenses, eliminating the structural deficit and positioning ourselves responsibly for the long term. We must eliminate the structural deficit. This is the principle upon which the whole budget is based. Let's look at the structural deficit in a different way. This graph shows the structural deficit, again, ongoing revenues minus ongoing expenses. You can see in FY07, we had a structural surplus. Our revenues exceeded our ongoing expenses. Then in FY08, we had a small structural deficit of 20 million, small relative to our entire budget. 20 million is a lot of money, certainly. And then in FY09, as you know, our income dropped. At the same time, our expenses went up. So the gap between revenues and expenses expanded to 87 million. It worsened in FY10 to 121.9 million. And the revised FY11 gap is predicted to be 103.6, and my proposal will bring it to 0 in FY12. The goal is a structurally balanced budget in FY12. Why? Well, we don't want to have this discussion year after year. And those of you who've been in the legislature the last several years know that it's resulted in cuts and freezes and dissatisfaction all around. Let's take our medicine once. That way in the future we can talk about growth and increases, not death from 1,000 cuts. Now let me give you some specifics on how I'm proposing we get there. First, although I want to talk about cuts, I'm proposing the following are mandatory general fund increases we must fund for fiscal year 12, and these are things over which we have little or no control. The top two lines show a mandatory shift in Medicaid funding. The feds will pay less, and we must pay more of each Medicaid dollar. The top number, the $25 million amount, is the burden the federal government took off our shoulders when the recession began. They said, we'll pay more Medicaid for a while than we should. They're giving that burden back to us now. That's the 25 million. The second number increases our burden because of our strong personal income growth as compared to other states. In other words, South Dakota is stronger than other states, so the federal government says you must pay a larger share. This assessment of relative strengths of the states is something that occurs every year. That reassessment that compares us to other states was frozen and not done during these last several years of the recession. That's over. Now we're back to the catch-22. We're stronger. We have strong personal income growth. In fact, the second quarter of 2010, we had the highest personal income growth in the nation. The flip side of that coin is the federal government says, South Dakota, you're so strong, we're giving you more of the burden of each Medicaid dollar, and we're taking less as the federal government. The third line is some additional stimulus money that we must replace with general funds. The $12 million is a continuation of what we've seen already, more people using Medicaid and using it more often. We're also predicting, I mentioned that K-12 enrollment was lower now than it was in '03. But this past year, it would have been still lower if not for about 1,000 pupil growth in FY11, or in the 11 enrollments. So we've got to replace or add more money for state aid because of those additional students. We also have special education increase because it's required to meet a federal maintenance of effort for special education funding. Then the federal government is increasing the rate of reimbursement for several Medicare programs. That impacts us, and we have to add almost $2 million to our general funds for that. Not only is K-12 and higher ed enrollment growing this next year, but so is tech school enrollment growing. So we need to add some dollars for additional tech school students. And then various other mandatory increases for a grand total of $85,500,000 in increased expenditures. We need to address these increased expenditures at the same time we eliminate the structural deficit. How will we do it? We can't spend what we don't have. I am proposing to cut 10% throughout state government, more so in some of my executive branch agencies. Education funding at all levels includes the per student allocation in K-12 funding, in state aid to general education, the per student funding in post-secondary institutes, and the Board of Regents. The 10% cuts to Medicaid providers also includes cuts in the following agencies: social services, corrections, human services, and the unified judicial system. The rest of the cuts were made to specific agencies, including every agency within state government. For example, social services cut provider rates by 10% and also cut the rest of their budget by 10%, at least. After 2 years now of no salary increases, I regret we still have no resources to increase the salaries of our highly competent state workforce. It's my hope that when better times return, we can offer raises to our state workers, but not this year. State employees in leadership positions are already leading by examples. I have asked every member of my cabinet to accept a pay cut of 10% or more. New cabinet members will make at least 10% less than their predecessors. This will save the state over $200,000 per year. In addition, I cut the total salaries earned by the governor's office by 12%, a savings to the state of another $200,000 per year. This $400,000 in cuts took effect last week. I also cut my own salary by 15% last week. I believe strongly we cannot ask others to accept cuts and find efficiencies unless we're willing to do it ourselves. Now let's take a closer look at the cuts I'm proposing. The minimum cuts to the executive branch on the left hand is 10%, and some as high as 22%. Every office, agency, and branch of government will see a 10% reduction, at least, in this budget proposal. I believe in shared sacrifice, and unless everyone participates, I believe we won't be able to reach the goal. I have asked the other branches and offices to also find 10% cuts on the right-hand side here. Many were able to do this and are working toward this goal still. Some have concerns about their ability to reach 10%, and I believe that is a good discussion for them to have with the Appropriations Committee. For my part, I have built a budget that incorporates a minimum of 10% cut for everyone. As you can see, the grand total of the cuts is nearly $127 million. Now, the next slide talks specifically about how these cuts will affect K through 12 school districts. This chart shows that school districts receive many sources of revenue in addition to the per student allocation that is determined by the legislature each year. In the bar, you can see that on average, the state school districts spend about $8,800 per student across the state. This is made in part of the green part, that is capital outlay receipts, special ed receipts in the purple, other general fund receipts like way station fines, speeding tickets, electricity, gross receipts tax, other kinds of general fund receipts in the orange. And then the blue bar and the gray bar together represent the per pupil allocation, which today is $4,804.60. The 10% reduction that is being proposed eats into these two pieces. It is in part a reduction of state aid, and it is in part a reduction of property taxes. And so you can see the white sliver that is divided between those sources. A 10% cut to the per student allocation is $480.46 per student. Considering all the revenues that school districts receive, the reduction on a statewide average is only 5.4% in total funding. Many people have said this will just increase property taxes over the long term. In fact, just the opposite is true. The reduction in my budget proposal of 10% actually means that property taxes will decrease for the next 2 years. If schools can make their case that they would rather increase property taxes or maintain them than streamline their operations like state government is doing, they have that option. I am a big believer in local control, and this proposal allows that option to work on a school-by-school basis. I want to be very clear here. This proposal reduces property taxes. Again, if school boards can convince the voters to opt out and maintain or raise the levels of property taxes back to what they were paying before the reduction, that's a local decision. I would encourage administrators to look first for efficiencies. Let's look now at how my budget proposal will affect the FTE count. My budget proposal reduces agencies under my control by 161 FTE. This is the third consecutive year of a recommended reduction in FTEs in agencies under control of the governor. The large reduction in tourism and state development is attributable to employees transferring to the Deep Underground Science and Engineering Laboratory funded by the National Science Foundation or the U.S. Department of Energy. A reduction of 39.7 FTE in the Department of Correction impacts each institution while still providing sufficient security and safety to both inmates and staff. A 178.9 increase in the Board of Regents is to cover growing federal and private grant and contract awards for research, faculty, and assistants. These are not generally funded FTE, so that does not impact our structural deficit at all. Now let's turn to the structural deficit. What is our structural deficit? This slide shows the structural deficit for FY12 under the December proposal compared to my proposal now. In the December proposal, ongoing revenue of 1.165 less ongoing expenses of 1.296 billion creates a structural deficit of $140 million before the proposed cuts. The cuts that were proposed last December, the 5 and 5.9% cuts, still leaves a deficit, a structural deficit of $74.8 million. My proposal recognizes that revenue will go up a little bit. It also recognizes that expenses will go down a little bit and results in a structural deficit that's a little bit better, but still $127 million. This is what we need to cut, as I said, to balance our budget structurally. Let's look at December's proposal graphically. Under the December proposal, you'll recall that we had a structural deficit above the zero line. We had a $7.1 million surplus in FY07. We dropped to $20 million structural deficit in FY08. Then the recession hit us, and our structural deficit became a negative $87 million, and then FY10 was $121.9 million. The revised FY11 projection brought us to $108.4 million, which was laid out to you last December. If no cuts had been made, you saw there were mandatory increases in spending. That would have brought our deficit down to about a negative $140 million structural deficit. In the budget proposed last December, there was 5.9% cuts to the agencies, 5% to K-12 education and school higher ed, and 5% cut to providers. Even with those cuts, the improvement is only $65.5 million. We still were short of zero, and we made it up with one-time monies. The December budget proposed to spend stimulus money and also use part of our one-time reserves, our rainy day funds. This is a short-term solution to a long-term problem. It was a good start, but it does not eliminate the structural deficit. It still leaves us with a deficit that needs to be made up. Now let's look at my proposal. Again, this shows the same kind of history, except that improves the structural deficit for FY12 before the cuts, again because of improved revenue and expense projections. But it recognized that we have to cut $127 million to get our structural deficit to zero. It solves the problem at hand and offers us a brighter tomorrow. Now, some have advocated using our rainy day funds to help balance the budget. What about our rainy day funds? Let's take a look at what governments hold in rainy day funds or in their cash balances. From fiscal year 03 to 2009, you can see what various government entities have as a percentage of their operating budgets. We had at one time as high as maybe 17% of our operating budget in reserves. That has come down to less than 10%, which is less than 1 month's operating expenses. K through 12 school districts, over that time, their percentage in reserves has grown from about 18% to something now between 20 and 25, maybe 22%. Cities have grown from 35 to something less than 40% of their operating budget. And counties at the top there, they had in FY03 something over 45%. Now they've got about 50%. Now these are averages. These are averages. Some school districts have more than 100% of their general fund or their operating fund in reserves. Some have less than 1%. It's all over the board. Same is true with cities. Some have more than 100%, some have less. Counties have, I think the smallest reserve that counties have is 20%. Some have over 100% in reserves. I'm not saying these are good or bad things. I'm just giving you some information. Let's look at dollar amounts. Where have the dollar amounts gone? In our state, again, we had about $106.5 million in reserves in FY03. In 2004, on the tail end of another mini recession, the federal government gave us some stimulus money. Back then, I'm calling it Stimulus 1. Back then, our budget was pretty healthy. We used a little bit of it, but we banked most of it. That's why our reserves went up to almost 160 million. Then it came down when we spent money for the deep underground lab in fiscal year 05, and then it's come down to where it is today 107 million. And this carries only through 2009 because not all government entities have information publicly available yet for 2010. So it shows that counties have gone up in their total reserves. You can see where cities have gone up to about 140 million. K through 12 schools have gone up a little over $180 million. Again, I'm not saying this is right or wrong on the part of any government entity. One thing I'd say is we're not fat. South Dakota isn't fat when we compare ourselves to other governments. Now that we've compared ourselves to other entities, let's take a look at what happens if we use one-time money to continue spending more than we're taking in, like Steve did. Why not use reserves? This chart shows how we achieved our expenditures in years FY09 through 11, and what would happen if we followed the plan that was laid out last December. Let's look at fiscal year 09. The gray part of this bar is ongoing revenue. That's our tax income. It's our sales tax. It's our contractor's excise. That's the gray part of the bar. And you can see it's about 1.13 something billion dollars. Then we also used some one-time money, cash balances in one of our accounts, like the Aeronautics Fund or one of the other funds, a Railroad Trust Fund, some of the monies that the legislature has segregated, but the legislature still has the power to take and sweep out and use. And the legislature did that. They took about $13 million in one-time money from one of these cash balances, or more than one, and then they used this blue part of the bar is stimulus 2. So you can see we spent about $1.225 billion total. Where did it come from? Mostly from our own resources, but quite a bit from one-time monies. Then in FY10, the gray part of the bar shrinks. Remember, our income went down in FY10. We made that difference up because our overall expenses went up. How did it go up? Because we used more one-time money in cash balances, and we also used more stimulus money, $101 million in stimulus money. Now, FY11, the proposed budget that was laid before you last December, showed a use of, or it showed that our revenue is increasing. It's recovered. Remember, it's still below 2008 revenue, but it's up from FY10. Not as far up as we thought it would be. We're about 16 million short of where we thought it'd be, but it's still up. We used some one-time money. The proposal was to spend some of our reserves, 14 million of our reserves, and then the rest of what I'm calling stimulus 2. Stimulus 2 was the big stimulus package that the federal government appropriated near the beginning of the recession. And then last August, the federal government passed more stimulus help for the states last August after we adjourned. So the proposed amendment to the FY11 budget would add some of that so that we could achieve this increase in overall spending for FY11 that we wanted to achieve. The FY12 budget that was laid before you last December proposed that we estimate revenue for FY12, our ongoing tax revenue, at 1.156, that an increase over FY11. We spend about $1 million in one-time money right there, this little sliver. Use about 36.9 of our own reserves from that 107, and then spend the rest of the stimulus money. You can see the overall expenses are down because remember that budget proposed a 5% cut, 5 and 5.9, so the overall expenses are down, but we're spending in FY11 14 and FY12 36.9 from our 107 million rainy day funds. So then what do we do in FY13? Let's look ahead. Let's assume expenses and income remain the same. That's probably unreasonable. We can probably project that our income's going to go up, but so will our expenses. We know for certain that our FMAP will grow. Again, our personal income growth is very strong. And so we know 2 out of the 3 years that are used by the federal government to average that assessment are very strong. And in the 3rd year, we were highest in the nation, one of the quarters. So the chance that our FMAP burden will shrink is 0. The chance that it will grow is virtually 100%. So, but let's assume there's no growth or no growth in revenue, no growth in expenses. We still need to use, the stimulus money's gone. We've only got 56.1 left of our rainy day funds. Where's the rest of the money coming from? We don't have it. The gun is at our head. Using reserves sounds good, but it just kicks the can down the road for another year, and FY13 presents a year in which our options are gone. It's not enough to go just part way. If we do, we'll be back here again next year talking about more cuts, and we will have squandered most, if not all, of our reserves. I'm tired of talking about cuts every year and about freezes. I'm tired of looking at death by 1,000 paper cuts. We need to hit the reset button and get our budget to a new norm. The new norm for state government must be a level of ongoing expenditures that equals our ongoing revenues. It's like having a bandage on your arm. Do you want to peel it off a little tiny bit at a time? No. Let's tear it off. Let's get the pain over with. Let's set ourselves up for a positive future, a brighter future, instead of this freeze and cut year after year. I'm tired of it. If we do this, if we adopt the budget I propose, I believe we can come back in future years and talk about growing revenue and new ideas to invest in our state. Now let's talk about some of the revisions to the FY 2011 budget that we must make. We have to amend the general fund because things have changed since we adjourned last year. The $17 million number is a reduction to our general fund. That's an amendment we would pass because of the new federal stimulus money that was passed in August after we had already adjourned and adopted our budget. The second number, the DHS adjustments of $2.9 million, we're reducing in 2011 so we can also reduce in 2012, but we'll still meet the maintenance of effort levels for mental health and alcohol and drug abuse. We also have a reduction proposed for the FY11 budget in utilities, due to utility costs being lower than what was originally projected. The tech school enrollments are up. So we need to put more money into the FY11 budget to pay for those additional students. I mentioned earlier that the K through 12 enrollments are up, above what we believed they would be. So we need to put more money into the FY11 budget to cover those. All told, it's a $15.7 million reduction in general fund expenditures in the FY11, meaning we no longer would need reserves to balance the FY11 budget. Now let's look at special appropriations that we would need to also have in the FY12 budget. Over the last 12 months, an unprecedented 7 disaster declarations were issued in our state, setting a costly and burdensome new record for South Dakota. Additionally, the Office of Emergency Management is continuing to administer 7 other disasters that occurred in previous years and are not yet closed out. Since all the disasters have not yet been finalized, we're proposing that this appropriation be delayed, this $13 million appropriation be delayed until the FY12 budget. Also another special appropriation, so this is a special appropriation we do in FY12. Here's another one that you see annually. It's the Physician Tuition Reimbursement Program. We need to have that special appropriation in FY12. And tax refunds for the elderly and disabled. Again, this is a recurring special appropriation that I propose as part of the FY12 budget. Now let's look at how the 2 revised budgets compare under my proposals. You can see, and this includes special and continuous appropriations. We'll spend in general funds 1.148 in 11, spend less than that in 12. In federal funds, we'll spend 1.9 in 11, less than that in 12. In other funds, we'll spend a little over $1 billion in 11, less than that in 12. All told, total funds expended in 2011 would be $4 billion plus. In 2012 would be about 3.9 plus. Let's summarize. Our budget picture is thus. Ongoing revenues have remained soft. Ongoing expenses have continued to grow. Stimulus 2 and 3 gave us time. In an ordinary recession recovery cycle, it would have been enough time, but it's not. Reserves are not the answer for the reasons I showed just a minute ago, and I am committed to eliminate the structural deficit. So let's revisit that goal. The goal is to eliminate the structural deficit in fiscal year 2012. That will mean $127 million in cuts. This is our goal. As governor, my job is to present a budget proposal that starts the discussion. I have put before you a plan that eliminates the structural deficit without raising taxes, as the voters have called upon us to do. The plan recognizes that we can only meet our goal if everyone shares in the sacrifice. This is not the plan, it is a plan. It is the beginning of the discussion, and I'm sure you will have ideas to improve it. I'm ready to consider those ideas, but I'm not willing to abandon the principles upon which the budget is built. Ongoing expenses must be covered by ongoing revenue. The budget must be structurally balanced without raising taxes. One-time money should be used for one-time expenses and not perpetuate overspending. We owe it to the people of South Dakota to have a serious discussion about this budget. Now, we owe them more than just an exchange of rhetoric. It's easy to oppose some of these cuts. It's easy to talk vaguely about waste in government, yet offer no concrete solutions. That gets us nowhere. I have proposed a real plan with real numbers that balances our structural deficit, or eliminates our structural deficit, and balances our budget. To do that required me to call for cuts that many oppose. This discussion can only work if we talk about changes and items in terms of dollars and cents. When some seek to restore funding in one area or another, we must ask, what will that cost? And where else can we cut? Because we can't spend money we don't have. I mentioned this the other day, and I'd like to mention again. The halls of our capital are filled with good people who represent the special interests of our state. They have a job to do. Their job is not to look at the big picture. Their job is to represent their clients. There's nothing wrong with that. We cannot forget, though, that there is a larger but less organized group, the taxpayers. We are sent here to represent all of South Dakota, not just those who are organized and represented here. We represent the taxpayers as well as the tax spenders. As governor, my promise is to always put the taxpayers first. We are all here to do the people's business. The answers to our problems are simple. They're not easy, but they're simple. As I said 11 days ago, some of our sister states and some cities within them face the real prospect of default because of their mountains of deficits and debt. They have yet to learn that you cannot spend your way out of a recession. Their broken systems perpetuate the unsustainable patterns of spending and borrowing that have brought them to the brink of ruin. They have promised their citizens something for nothing and created a society where everyone wants to be carried and no one wants to pull their own weight. South Dakota is not like that. Our values work. Our system works. Our state works. We don't spend money we don't have. We save during the years of plenty and to provide during the years of naught. And we let our taxpayers keep more of their hard-earned money, more than any other state, in fact. Now, it is not preordained that South Dakota will always be strong or prosperous or free. It is the obligation of every generation to secure these blessings for the generation to come. If we fail, if we allow our state to become ensnared in a pattern of entitlement and debt, it will be because we forgot these core principles that have served us for so long. It's too easy to let the expediencies of the present distract us from the values that will carry us in the future. It's too easy to make an exception just this once, rather than face the tough choices. I know others will urge that we defer our problems rather than face them. That might be the easy way, and it might be the politically expedient way. But we will not go down that path, not on our watch. We will make the tough choices, the right choices, to put our state on a strong foundation for the future. And when we look back from that brighter future, we will know we did our job, and South Dakota is better and stronger for our having done it. Thank you.